Copper was reacted with silver nitrate to produce silver crystals. The first day of the experiment involved measuring the initial mass of all substances and materials needed, then activating the reaction by submerging the copper coil into a silver nitrate solution. After allowing 24 hours for reactant time, a stirring rod was used to remove the silver crystals formed on the wire. To remove the silver crystals from the solution, a method of decanting was used repeatedly until the solids were separated from the liquid. Another 24 hours was used to ensure that the silver was completely dry before collecting the ending data. At the end, it was concluded that through chemically reacting copper with silver nitrate, a production of silver crystals occurs through both oxidation and reduction. The percentage error of silver was 3%.
The purpose of this experiment was to find the quantitative relation with copper, silver, and nitrate. Also to produce silver crystals from copper and silver nitrate. So the hypothesis for the experiment was as follows. If copper reacts with silver nitrate, then silver crystals would be produced. In this process, oxidation is the gain of oxygen and the loss of electrons, contrary to reduction, where there are loss of oxygen ions and a gain of electrons. The spectator ion is an ion that appears on both sides and just spectates. In this experiment, copper was oxidized and silver was reduced. Nitrate spectated and was a spectator ion.
The materials for the copper-silver nitrate reaction lab are 1 6-inch piece of copper wire, 15 milliliters of 0.1 molar silver nitrate, 100 milliliter beaker, 1 600 milliliter beaker, 1 digital scale, 1 glass test tube, parafilm, 1 pipette, 1 stirring rod, labeling tape, 1 H2O water wash bottle, acetone, test tube rack, and a drying oven. The procedures for day 1 is get a piece of copper wire and clean and dry the test tube. Find the mass of the 100 milliliter beaker and copper wire by placing them separately on the scale. Find the mass of them combined as well. Use a pencil to wrap the coil around so the copper wire has generally even coils. Stretch out the coil by lightly pulling the bottom and the top of the coil. Pour 15 milliliters of 0.1 molar silver nitrate into the test tube so that the coil is fully submerged in it. Day 2. Use a 600 milliliter beaker as a waste container. Use a stirring rod to help take the silver crystals off of the copper wire. Rinse the copper wire into the 100 milliliter beaker. To clean the wire, dip it in acetone and then set to dry. Find the mass of the dry wire. Use a pipette to remove only the water from the 100 milliliter beaker. Rinse the silver with 10 milliliters of distilled water. Once the silver settles, use the pipette to remove the water again. Repeat steps 8 3 times. Place the 100 milliliter beaker in the oven. Find the mass of the silver crystals.
Next, we have our data. Here is a chart of our physical observations with their chemical explanations. First, the copper was shiny, and the solution was clear and colorless. The explanation is that copper atoms were being submerged in a silver nitrate solution. Next, the copper wire turned black in the solution, and the explanation for this is that copper yields copper ion 2 plus 2 electrons. Next, the silver crystals begin to form on the surface of the wire, and the explanation for this is 1 electron plus 1 silver ion yields silver, and 2 electrons plus 2 silver ions yields 2 silver atoms. Next, the solution turned blue, and this indicated the presence of Cu2 plus ions and that NO3 minus or nitrate ions are spectator ions. Next, we have our raw mass data table, and the mass of the copper wire before the reaction is 1.08 grams. Mass of the empty labeled 250 milliliter beaker was 29.07 grams. the mass of the copper wire after reaction is 1.06 grams. The mass of the beaker with dry silver crystals is 29.14 grams, and the mass of silver crystals is 0.07 grams. Next is our analysis table, which shows that the mass of the copper wire lost is 0.02 grams. Moles of copper reacted was 0.0003 moles. The mass of the silver formed is 0.07 grams. The moles of silver formed is 0.0006 moles. The expected ratio of moles of silver over the moles of copper is 2.1 moles of silver over 1 mole of copper. The experimental ratio of moles of silver over moles of copper was 2 moles of silver over 1 mole of copper. And the number of silver atoms was 4 times 10 to the 23rd, and the number of copper atoms was 2 times 10 to the 23rd. The experimental ratio of atoms of silver over the atoms of copper is 2 atoms of silver over 1 atom of copper. The percent yield of silver was 97.14%. The percent error of silver was 2.92%.
This intriguing investigation involved a single replacement reaction with copper metal and silver nitrate, which produced silver metal and copper nitrate. During the first day of the investigation, the masses of copper wire and the 250 milliliter beaker were measured on a digital scale. After the measurements of the masses were recorded, the copper wire was wrapped around a pencil to create a coiled shape, and it was placed in a test tube. Soon after, 30 milliliters of 0.1 molar mass of silver nitrate was poured into the test tube, which then caused the copper wire to be fully submerged in the solution. Physical observations of the chemical reaction were recorded for 30 minutes. The first observation was that the copper wire was shiny and the solution was clear. The chemical explanation for this observation is that the copper atoms were submerged in silver nitrate. The second observation was that the copper wire became black. The explanation for this observation is that the copper was oxidized, thus it became black. The third observation was that the silver nitrate solution became light blue. The chemical explanation for this is that the copper ions were indicated and that the nitrate was a spectator ion because it appeared on both sides of the